the way I understood it and the way I initially rolled this out and the way I initially presented this was what unified communications does is, and the way I view it is, it's a way of integrating all the various ways that not only an individual communicates, but a business communicates as well. It takes the way we fax, the way we speak, the way we share desktops, the way we text, the way we do anything that has to do with communications, and it's under a single umbrella, and we call that unified communications.
And it makes it more efficient and makes it more effective.
I think what's even more important is I think it's driven by the clients, because
Yes.
if you go back, it was called hosted VoIP, right? And hosted VoIP is voice.
Mm-hmm.
So everybody looked at it as replacing their phone system to be able to pick up a handset and call. And now it's called unified communications, and the reason why is the clients are now adopting.
It's everything else. Yes. Voice.
But even to start with it, it started with, I think everybody liked the feature of being able to have your voicemail with your email so that you could save it, you could see it. Now, I think the next one that people are truly adopting is chat, because it's better than email, and you could do it real time.
And document share.
And then now document share is coming
It's
in.
multitasking in its truest form. And you can be
Video.
on a phone, and you get, out of the corner of your eye, somebody sends you a chat that's asking for information, and you can do that while you're doing whatever it is you're currently doing without missing a beat or dropping a beat, and people get the stuff they need now, which drives productivity and hopefully increases revenue.
The features have been there. I mean, Impact had many of these features, but people weren't using them, and maybe it's a function of the seller not articulating it well, but practically speaking, there's an inertia associated with an organization of what they're doing and how they do it.
Right.
And
It's
you
also getting
can't
used
fight
to
that, or
those.
you can help, but now people are embracing it more, and I think there's an issue with the younger worker coming in who's much more familiar with things like bringing their own device and using their own
They're more
devices
savvy.
and how that. So how does that impact it?
So it's a cultural shift, right? So we started out with a product that at first people wanted to understand how they could be more productive with it. Now that we've learned how to be more productive and we're sending a lot more emails and utilizing the other functionality that comes in with it, we want more. However, there is still that organization that hasn't been using that piece yet, or is starting to form, or starting to branch out. So now we have different plateaus of knowledge and people that are utilizing it, more advanced users or more middle tier users. And that's where these more highly efficient features come in, where they're sharing the documents. And now we're starting to be able to track whether people are actually downloading that document, who it was. So kind of putting a chain of custody literally behind the documentation to protect our intellectual property, right? And so we're still going to have the user that is just learning the effectiveness
But
of...
stop, as a business owner, how does that help me?
So it lets you control your intellectual property, whether it be on a mobile device or whether it be on your desktops. It allows you to now not have to send an email that has an attachment in it, which is going to cost you money within your email side. So there's a financial piece.
When you talk about chain of custody, you telling me that if someone left, that I would know what they downloaded and be able to go to that individual and say, hey, listen, you took A, B, C, and D, and you should know. Is that
Absolutely, right. And in fact, you can
That's
tell
big.
them which versions, or if they even, so let's assume that employee, don't want to put anybody down, but at the end of the day, if that employee was actually malicious, what if someone went in and edited all the content that they had access to? If you're not auditing this, they could have changed every term that said the Queen being the Queen of England and turned it into the Queen Bee, so every time you publish something, it made you look like a fool, right? So it's also being able to track that potential
That's
malicious
good.
activity, right?
Look at it that way.
And so there's multiple variations with that chain of custody, and most people actually have that need. So if I'm sending you information that has a password in it along with a user ID or something else, which is against the security standard, if it's done in a mechanism where I can actually track who can get access to that information, i.e. it's not a file in it as an attachment in the email, where anyone could download that email, they could hack into a system and grab or do whatever. In this case, it's a link. Only certain people have access. Once they've accessed it, it literally creates for government standards, for any education system, for any HIPAA standards, for any standards that are out there around that controlled, obviously, chain of custody responsibility, you now solve it. You solve it like that. You solve it simply.
Well, the other piece of the security too is that if you're using a device that you never used before, somebody leaves the company and they're using a device at home, we're going to get notification that the device was accessed and
Good point.
trying to pull up information that is protected. We know. We
Location.
get that every day.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, the IP address.
Well, another advantage for the worker is they don't have to come in and have their device,
Never.
ripped apart and deleted and all this other stuff, or so it's nice to be able to say, okay, I'm walking away.
As long as you have
That's an
internet
advantage as well,
connectivity.
right?
Absolutely. I mean, the bottom line is, look, the devices that are out there today are superhuman, especially a lot of the college kids coming out of schools today. They've built their own laptops, they've built their own computers, right? They're a gamer, there are high-end systems sitting out there. As an IT department, we don't want to provide the most high-end systems to our users because they don't need
It's
that.
expensive.
And they're making PowerPoint presentations, Excel spreadsheets, working off of web-based applications. There's a need, but not for the highest end in any way, shape, or form. So you have multiple tiers. When you deploy those tiers out there, that asset costs you money. So if I'm going to bring in an intern or if I'm going to bring in an employee that's going to work for me as a contractor, I don't want to spend the money on having my IT person have to build that instance for them. I want to be able to give them a virtual desktop, and at that point, apply all the characteristics that are absolutely important to locking it down. Can't copy to this, can't do that, right? And I start to bring in that control, and now you can use that super powerful Mac. And you know what? I don't require you to learn my platform. I'm going to let you use the platform you're used to using, so I know that you're productive the minute you're walking in the door. In nothing new, no new buttons, not moving from a Mac keyboard that changes its control functionalities with copies and paste and everything else. Stay productive on the platform you understand. Let me give you my ability to control my intellectual property. And at that point, it becomes a reduced risk in case that person doesn't work out too.
Well, the other side of it, it'll help me recruit,
Absolutely.
high-end, next generation workers.
Yep.
Because that's a benefit.
Yep.
Bob, question for you. Typically, someone moves to a unified communication platform when their existing hardware reaches end of life. Okay, are you seeing anything different with people kind of moving before that? Like, we're talking about a lot of things that are really interesting, but is it something that's actually getting people who maybe are 4 years into, a purchase of an Avaya system or a Cisco system and saying, you know what, I want some increased functionality?
I found that. My experience has shown that people are concerned, and they are certainly aware of the hardware that they have and how close it's getting to end of life. And that's usually indicative of things, I don't like using that word, but things that they would like to do, that they heard that they can do, but they can't do because of the equipment that they're currently using. When they find out that migrating to a UCaaS sort of environment is really kind of simple, they're more willing to look at what needs to be done more focused than they did in the past. And they tend to make that jump a lot more quickly, knowing that, because really all they need, if they're using it for an internal business solution, is a circuit.
Well, and I would also think what's interesting is that's not going to be driven by like a business owner typically, right? Because I look at it as we can make phone calls, we can communicate, we can do everything that we're doing. I've got an expense associated with this. Why am I throwing that out and moving forward? So if I look at like a Cisco system or an Avaya system, it's kind of expensive to add on these different modules. By being able to kind of just use what I need when I need and being able to scale, bringing in these, remote folks who can supplement our existing internal staff in order to do projects so we could scale up and down associated with it. I think it gives additional functionality. When will someone be productive at their desk? Because I'm used to dealing with Cisco or Avaya. I know how to do that.
Sure.
If you just stick that phone on my desk and say, have a great day, John, I'm in a bad place.
Oh, sure.
I'm going to figure it out. So we're talking about being more productive. We're talking about being able to better manage our business. We're talking about, having some chain of custody and some security. We're talking about being able to video, being able to chat and all these different things. But if I'm looking at a phone and I have a computer, like, I need to be able to use it worthwhile. So how long does it take and what's the process?
Let's look at the steps. Do you need the hardware initially? You don't. Because if you are using UCC as intended to use, and you have a laptop, again, to your point, bring the device with you, a device that's supplied by the organization. Doesn't matter, as long as you have internet connectivity, you have soft phone.
The reality is looking at the persona of the individual that we would be kind of addressing this from, right? The financial officer expects those assets to be refreshed on a quarterly basis or a yearly basis or every 3 years or whatever the life cycle of that physical hardware's asset, value, depreciation of that asset ends up coming into place, and then they'll usually refresh it. So usually it's 1/3 of the environment is refreshed every year and it's put on a 3-year schedule, right? That's generally what ends up happening, so that every couple of years a new asset comes through. That's standard for laptops and other devices. Obviously the mobile platform has changed a little bit in that whole, where it's every year almost, but That allows us to figure that there is a specific financial commitment into those phones already done. So if you're replacing an old phone that asset has appreciated, it's 1-for-1 for me. If you're going to make it less expensive and give me more functionality, it's a huge win for me. But I've already committed to the capital expense over the next years to have that device for each one of my employees. If it's greenfield, if it's brand new, right, then that's the point where it's a brand new expense. It wasn't already anticipated for, and now I have to define a life cycle behind it of when do I bring in that new asset. And I think the simplicity of what the unified communications brings as a whole is the ability that the only thing you have to do is swap out that hardware, the piece of the phone component. The rest of it can still be administrated through the cloud now.
I'm really focusing on the people because
Yeah.
the most valuable asset in an organization are the people, being productive. So I've got a sales organization. I can sit here in theory and say, hey, this is great. They can collaborate better. They can do, have more effective one-on-ones, yada, yada. They can chat. All right, that's wonderful in theory. But if they're not doing it and they're not using those features and functionality, it doesn't really do a lot. Or if they look at this potentially as, okay, now there's something else. I've got existing phones. Everything is working fine. How long does it take to, in essence, because the reality is once a sales manager sees and the individual salesperson sees that they're more productive, okay, it's done. So if it's going to take a long time to get this buy-in and everything else, in my opinion, it's not as effective and it won't be adopted.
What do they end up using? They end up using what's important to them, and what's important to them is going to differ from individual to individual, as well as their specific job responsibilities. Training doesn't take that long. It's really intuitive, and the materials that we have and the materials that we deploy are really straightforward and pretty simple. Plus the fact that we have 24/7 support, doesn't hurt. So people always have the ability to give us that call, and they do, which is great. But what I found is that when you're talking about the features, you're talking about the benefits, and you're talking about the extra productivity that they're going to get, they love that, clearly. But what really clinches it is when, especially if you're in an organization that derives their revenue from the sales side, they love the reports, and they see what they can do with the customized reporting that's now available that they didn't have before, and it was a real pain in the if they were using an Avaya or any sort of premises-based phone system. It was virtually impossible for them to get the kind of reports that they wanted, specifically if they were customized. They needed to be customized. With unified communications, it's whatever they want to see, whenever they want to see it. They can be scheduled and sent to them in an email and to as many other people as they need to see it. They can get exception reports being sent, which really at that point begins to drive the productivity of the people, because now they can develop them even more so than they did in the past. They now can see what they're doing, how they're doing it, and what kind of output they're getting as a result of the work that they're doing. And UCC allows that.
When we come to the plate with our capabilities in that rollout and in that understanding, in that onboarding, right, and on that enablement and getting into the package, and then furthermore the follow-up to that actual deployment.
It is a solution that relates to productivity and efficiency and growing business, as opposed to, I think, what the legacy term opposed to VoIP, which is really about cutting costs and saving money in a pure financial model. So I think it's really important that people focus on that aspect of the business, and it's not just a drop ship. It's a unified communication is about understanding what solutions it's solving, and then being able to make sure that each of those stakeholders, that it actually accomplishes that task on their behalf. And that's where the training
Absolutely.
and the implementation and the ability, like you said, to be accessible as people have questions real time, so that the productivity actually exists is critical. And that's something that's missing in the marketplace.
The points that you just made are the key to successful deployments. It's not just, to your point, this is what we have, this is what you can use, here it is, plug it in, go for it. What we do, and the perfect example is one of the most recent deployments, where it was the right fit. We knew that this particular client needed to migrate to a UCC based upon what we knew about them. But more importantly, what we did was we scheduled a meeting prior to any papers being signed, prior to any other discussions being held, to sit down with the key stakeholders within that organization. The key stakeholders were the sales managers, because they were the ones who were clearly yelling for this new technology to be deployed. And it was really a round robin discussion, what it is that they were trying to accomplish, what the solution would eventually affect, how difficult would it be for them as managers to understand what it is they needed to know, for them to pass that on to the people within their organization that reported to them. And once this was all laid out on the table, it was kind of like, wow, you can do that? Wow, we can do.
You can integrate with Salesforce.
Yeah,
You can integrate with Outlook.
Absolutely.
You can click and dial.
How easy is it to do that? How easy is it to sign on? Do I need to sign on?
That's key to the
All
adoption.
these questions were initially discussed. That took them over the finish line. Then, once we got to that point, then it was starting to pick on the various other features that added additional productivity to the mix.
Absolutely.
Mobile call, find me, follow me. All the things that sometimes we take for granted, but oftentimes we don't because we didn't know it existed. And so the more they know about it, it's like, wow, I didn't know we can do that.
What you have to do is help them to understand and take their vision and broaden their vision towards, look, Salesforce integration is here, it's available. You're not going to be there because internally you're not ready with your own Salesforce or whatever the reasoning is that goes behind for them not being ready right now. But as a roadmap item, 2 months from now, when your Salesforce is ready, we can integrate. And oh, by the way, part of this is potentially upgrading your Outlook version. And now that we've upgraded your Outlook version, it's a simple click of a button for somebody to schedule a meeting with everything fully integrated in it. And in fact, they can start the meeting from the exact same link. Now that proficiency starts to make sense. Now those feature-rich components start to apply to, in the next 3 to 6 months, not only am I more proficient now that I've implemented it, not only am I going to get my thirds of the company to change their culture slowly, I can actually give them a vision and a roadmap of saying within the next 3 to 6 months, sales teams, I expect this to be integrated and my expectations. So from a leadership position, we can start to broadcast that vision.
You know what you're saying? You know what I'm really hearing? And this is what we do really well at BCN1.
Mm-hmm.
We know our client. We know our prospect.
Exactly.
You're telling me what these features are, but you're not data dumping on me. We're having a collaborative conversation, and you're helping me design a roadmap where I can take my sales process and bring it to the next level and continually improve it, which is obviously going to be driving revenue.
Absolutely.